Casey Holbrook is 36 years old now, runs 41 mother cows on the same Sweetgrass County, Montana, ground her great-grandfather homesteaded in 1909, and keeps a framed sale ticket from a Saturday in March of 2024 hanging in her tack room where she sees it every single morning before she ever sees a cow. On that Saturday, she was 34, 2 years divorced, raising 2 kids on a checkbook that didn't have much give left in it, and standing at the back of the Sweetgrass County Fairgrounds, holding a number paddle nobody in that building expected her to use against the man bidding across the ring from her. Holt Brennan had already spent more money that morning on 3 other bulls than most ranchers in that room would clear in a year. Nobody much blamed Casey for sitting quiet through those first 3 lots. Lot 47 was a different matter. And what happened over the next 4 minutes is still the most talked about bid in the history of that sale. Somebody had to write this one down, or it would have been forgotten. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, take a second to subscribe before we go any further. The rest of it matters. Hap Dillard had been coming to the Yellowstone Valley Angus Association's bull sale every March for going on 40 years, mostly to visit with people he only saw that one weekend annually, and occasionally to buy a bull when his own herd needed fresh blood. He'd known 3 generations of Holbrooks, had bought hay off Casey's grandfather back when Hap himself was young enough to still be doing the stacking by hand, and had stood at Casey's own wedding 20-some years before that, never expecting to be standing 4 rows back from a ring watching her go toe-to-toe with the richest man in 3 counties. He was sitting 4 rows back from the ring that morning when the trouble, as he later called it, started. He didn't expect much out of the day beyond coffee and conversation. Most years he didn't bid on anything at all, just liked watching who did. Casey's herd bull, a steady, unremarkable animal named Tank that had covered her cows without complaint for 6 breeding seasons, died of bloat on a Tuesday morning in late January. Found stiff in the lower pasture before Casey had even gotten her coffee made. "Bull's down," she told the vet on the phone, dropping the article the way she always did when her hands were too full of something else to bother with extra words. There hadn't been a thing to do for him by the time she found him. The ground around him torn up some from where he'd struggled. The kind of details she didn't tell her kids about and didn't much want to remember herself. A cow-calf operation without a bull 2 months out from breeding season isn't a problem that waits politely for a person to grieve about it first. Leasing a replacement ran real money and real disease risk both, and buying outright meant finding something solid enough to use on first calf heifers, low birth weight, decent growth, without spending more than the operation could absorb in a single bad year. She'd been saving toward a bull upgrade anyway before Tank died. Money that had been earmarked for new perimeter fence before the emergency moved it to the top of the list. And by the first week of March, she had $8,400, sitting in an account she did not intend to touch $1 past. Getting there had meant selling 4 cull cows in February, rather than holding them for a better spring market, skipping the new winter coat she'd been putting off buying for 2 years running, and putting Wyatt's basketball camp on hold for a summer he didn't complain about nearly as much as she'd braced herself for. She'd gone through the Yellowstone Valley sale catalog 3 times by then, circling Lot 47 each pass. A yearling sired by a bull called Black Summit Forecast, known across that part of Montana for calving ease numbers that made him exactly the kind of cross a herd of young heifers needed, and exactly the kind of bull that wasn't likely to sell cheap. His birth weight EPD ran 2 full points lighter than anything else in the catalog that fit her budget range. The single number that mattered most to a herd carrying 11 first calf heifers that spring. The catalog photo showed an ordinary-looking yearling standing in an ordinary pen. Nothing about him that would have caught a casual eye scrolling past, which suited Casey just fine. She wasn't looking to catch anybody's eye. She was looking for a number. The drive into Big Timber that Saturday ran cold and clear. Frost still heavy on the fence, posts well past 9. The kind of late winter morning that makes a person grateful for a heater that still works right in a truck with 200,000 miles on it. Casey had the sale catalog on the seat beside her. Lot 47 circled in 3 different colors of ink from 3 separate passes, and a single folded slip of paper in her coat pocket, with one number written on it in her own hand. $8,400. She didn't take it out again the whole drive. She didn't need to. Holt Brennan had bought the Crazy Mountain Ranch 2 years earlier, 38,000 acres of grass and timber an hour south of Big Timber, and had spent most of the time since assembling what his ranch manager called, without much sense of how it sounded to the working ranchers around him, a Trophy Angus program. He'd had a new set of Powder River squeeze chutes installed the year before, and a runway of prefert panels nobody in the county had seen the like of. All of it bought, people said, the same way Brennan seemed to buy everything else, fast and without much haggling. He bid on 3 bulls that morning before Lot 47 ever came up. A heavily muscled 2-year-old with show ring confirmation that went for $14,500. A proven sire's full brother that brought $19,000 after a short bidding war with a ranch from 2 counties over, and a flashy yearling with a pedigree page longer than most of the catalog's other entries combined that closed at $22,750. He paid all 3 numbers without appearing to register them as anything more than the cost of doing what he'd already decided to do. He didn't ask the auctioneer to repeat a number once. A rancher 2 seats down from Casey leaned over sometime around the second of those bids and told her, not unkindly, that she might as well save her arm for a lot Brennan wasn't interested in. "He doesn't want every bull in the sale," Casey said, "just the good ones." She didn't say anything else, and the man didn't push it. Lot 47 came into the ring a little before 11 that morning. A long-bodied yearling that walked the pen the way Casey had hoped he would from the photos. And the bidding opened at $3,000 and climbed fast through the working ranchers in the room. The kind of men and women bidding their own real money on a bull they actually needed for actual cows. It thinned out past $6,000. By $7,200 it was down to 2 paddles, Casey's, and the one belonging to Wade Cosgrove, Brennan's ranch manager, working a cell phone against his ear with Brennan himself sitting 8 rows up giving him numbers in real time. Cosgrove had run cattle operations for other wealthy owners across 3 states before Brennan hired him, and had a reputation, locally, as somebody who knew genetics cold but bid other people's money the way a person spends a number that doesn't quite feel real to them yet. Pearl Anders, who'd run the concession stand at that sale for as long as anybody could remember and made a chili nobody had ever managed to talk the recipe out of her for, stopped pouring coffee long enough to watch the last few bids go back and forth, the way most of the room had by then. Conversation in the bleachers had dropped off entirely. Nobody was checking phones. Nobody was heading for the restroom between lots the way people usually did once a bull they weren't bidding on came through the ring. Hap Dillard, 4 rows back, found himself leaning forward without quite meaning to, the way a person leans into a card game they're not even playing. The bidding slowed to $50 raises somewhere past $8,000. The auctioneer's chant tightening up the way it does when 2 real bidders are both running close to a number neither one wants to say out loud. Casey watched Cosgrove's face. She watched his phone hand. She watched the half-second delay between when the auctioneer called a number and when Cosgrove actually moved his paddle, the particular hesitation of a man relaying instructions rather than making decisions of his own. Cosgrove bid $8,400, held the phone tight to his ear a long second, and didn't raise his paddle again. Casey did the only math left available to her, the same math she'd already done 3 times at her own kitchen table that week, and raised her paddle to $8,480. Not a gamble, not a guess, either. Just the last number on a list she'd already written down before she ever left the house that morning. 8480. Do I hear 85? The auctioneer called, looking dead at Cosgrove. Cosgrove held the phone against his chest, said something nobody close enough could quite hear, and waited. 5 seconds. 10. Somewhere up in the 8th row, Holt Brennan sat with his arms crossed, saying nothing at all, his face giving away considerably less than Cosgrove's did. Cosgrove shook his head once, small, and lowered his paddle. The hammer came down on $8,480. Casey Holbrook, 2 years divorced and 34 years old, had just outbid a billionaire by $80. Wyatt, who'd wandered back from the concession stand just in time to half-watch the last few bids, asked his mother on the drive home whether they were rich now. Casey told him no. They'd just bought a bull, and a fairly expensive one at that, and he should probably hold off telling his friends at school any different version of the story than that. Briar, in the back seat, was mostly concerned with whether the new bull would let her pet him. A question Casey answered honestly. Probably not. But they'd see. An EPD, expected progeny difference, is the number breeders use to predict how a bull's calves are likely to perform before a single one of them is ever born, calculated off generations of recorded data from the bull's relatives rather than anything visible standing in a pen. A bull can look like $1 million and still carry numbers that would put a first calf heifer in trouble at 2 a.m, and a plain, unremarkable-looking yearling can carry numbers good enough to make every experienced rancher in the room sit up and pay attention the moment the auctioneer reads them off. Lot 47 wasn't flashy. His numbers were. Casey's father, Gene Holbrook, had taught her to read an EPD sheet the same way some fathers teach their kids to read a box score, sitting at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings, going through whatever sale catalog had come in the mail that week, long before she had any cattle of her own to spend money on. She remembered being, maybe, 11, watching him circle a bull's birth weight number with a pencil and explain, patient, why a low number mattered more to a heifer than anything about how the animal looked standing in a photograph. He never had much patience for buying on a bull's looks alone. Looks don't calve a heifer easy, he told her more than once. Numbers do. And a man who bought on looks usually found that out the expensive way. Usually in April. Usually at 2 a.m, with a vet on the phone. He'd lost a heifer himself that way in 1987. A bull he'd bought purely because he liked the look of his shoulders, and he brought the story up often enough over the years that Casey could practically recite the vet's exact words back to him before he got to them. Not reckless. Her father. Just a man who'd learned the hard way once and never needed the lesson repeated. Gene was 71 that March, retired from the day-to-day running of his own place, but not from opinions about anybody else's, and he'd looked over Casey's notes on Lot 47 a full week before the sale and told her plainly that if the bull sold anywhere near what she'd budgeted, she shouldn't think twice. Her divorce in 2022 had not been friendly about money, and her ex-husband's family had said, more than once and not always quietly, that she'd be lucky to keep the place running past a single season on her own. Travis had never much liked ranch work to begin with, had taken a job selling farm insurance 2 counties over not long after their wedding, and the divorce, when it finally came, was more relief than rupture for either of them, though his side of the family hadn't seen it quite that generously. She hadn't said much back to any of it, not at the time. Or she had, a little, the kind of quiet answering back that comes out mostly in how a person keeps showing up to do the work rather than in anything spoken out loud. She'd just kept the books, kept the cows fed, and kept showing up to sales like this one with a number in her head she didn't intend to go past. The same discipline her father had drilled into her at that kitchen table years before any of it mattered. Her kids, Wyatt and Briar, 10 and 7 that spring, had ridden along to the sale in the back seat of the truck. both of them more interested in the concession stand's cinnamon rolls than in anything happening in the ring, which suited Casey fine. Holt Brennan found her at the coffee stand 20 minutes after the gavel, congratulated her without any visible irritation at all, and asked what she planned to do with him. She told him breed 41 commercial heifers and cows, same as she'd have done with any bull she bought that day. He nodded, said something about admiring a person who knew her own number and stuck to it, and admitted, almost as an aside, that he'd told Cosgrove $8,400 as a ceiling that morning, mostly out of principle, not wanting to pay a number that felt absurd for a yearling, no matter what he could afford, and that he honestly hadn't expected anybody in that room to push him all the way to it. Cosgrove, standing a few feet off, didn't say much of anything, though Casey thought she caught something close to relief on his face once the conversation moved past the topic of the number itself. Before Brennan walked off, he asked whether she'd consider selling him a few bull calves out of the cross in a couple years, if they turned out the way the pedigree suggested they should. She bred 38 cows to the new bull that spring. 36 live calves came in 2025, average birth weight 72 pounds, not a single hard pull in the bunch. Exactly the kind of season Black Summit forecast numbers had promised. The fall calf crop sold for just over $61,000, the best single year Casey's operation had run since she'd taken it over outright. Holt Brennan did call her the following winter, same as he'd said he might, and bought 4 bull calves out of that cross for his own program at $9,200 apiece. A deal that closed over the phone in about 15 minutes, with neither side mentioning the auction at all. Asked once by a county extension newsletter, writing up the local sale results, whether she'd been nervous bidding against a billionaire, Casey said she honestly hadn't thought about it that way in the moment. She'd been thinking about the heifers. The rest of it, she said, was just a number, same as any other number, and numbers didn't care whose name was attached to them. A handful of other single mothers running operations in that part of the state started reaching out to her after the local paper ran a short piece on the calf crop the following fall, asking less about the bull itself and more about how she'd built the discipline to walk into a sale with a hard number and actually stick to it. Casey didn't think she had much special advice to give beyond what her father had already told her years before. Write it down before you leave the house, she'd tell them. Don't let the room talk you past it. She started keeping a folder of her own for the calls and letters that came in that year. Nothing formal, just names and numbers in case anybody wanted to talk it through further. The same kind of folder her father had kept for decades, without ever calling it anything more than paperwork. Casey Holbrook is 36 now. She still runs the same 41 cows, still drives the same Dodge Ram with 200,000 miles on it, and still keeps her father's old sale catalogs in a box in the tack room next to the framed ticket from Lot 47. Her ex-in-laws don't say much anymore about how long she'd last. Jean still comes by most Saturdays to look over whatever catalog has come in that week, though these days it's usually Casey doing most of the explaining, and Wyatt, 12 now, has started circling numbers of his own, mostly to impress his mother, but increasingly, she suspects, because he's actually started to understand what he's looking at. Breyer still asks, every spring, whether this is the year the bull will finally let her pet him. So far the answer has stayed the same. Hep Dillard still tells the story the same way every March, standing near that same ring before the sale gets going. He says the room wasn't laughing at Casey, not exactly. Just doing the same math everybody else was doing and assuming it came out the same way for her. He says a person who knows her own number to the dollar will beat a person who's never had to learn one, regardless of how many zeros sit between the two of them. $80 decided that sale. 40 years of careful bookkeeping decided the $80, and nobody in that fairgrounds that morning, Casey included, had any way of knowing in advance which of those two facts the day was actually going to be about. The bull himself, the ranchers around there have started calling 80, half joking and half not. And Casey has never once corrected anybody who uses the name in front of her.